We are usually taught that when European explorers first crossed the Atlantic, they stumbled upon an untouched virgin wilderness, a sprawling, silent continent completely empty and waiting to be discovered. But archaeological and historical evidence shows this pristine wilderness is a historical lie. Pre-contact America was home to up to 100 million people across the hemisphere. These indigenous populations acted as a keystone species. Their daily actions, from hunting to agriculture, engineered the entire continent's ecosystem. The first Europeans did not arrive in an untamed wild. They stepped into a meticulously managed, continent-sized garden. Look at the scale of Mesoamerican metropolises like Teotihuacan. They featured massive urban planning, complex grid systems, and monumental architecture rivaling the ancient world. Further north, in the dry deserts of the American Southwest, ancestral Puebloans built vast cliff cities and engineered complex irrigation networks to water crops. On the East Coast, the Mississippian culture built massive mound cities. At its peak, the settlement of Cahokia, near modern-day St. Louis, held up to 40,000 residents, making it larger than London was at the time. To feed these massive populations, indigenous farmers accomplished an early technological marvel. They selectively bred and genetically engineered a tiny, inedible grass into the life-sustaining crop we know as maize. And they actively shaped the terrain itself. Native groups used highly controlled slash-and-burn tactics on a massive scale to clear dense forest canopies and cultivate vast grasslands that attracted game animals. So, if tens of millions of people were actively managing a thriving megagarden, why did later European colonizers record seeing an empty, silent frontier? Pathogens moved far faster than ships. Diseases like smallpox and plague swept inland through trade routes long before Europeans mapped the territory. Lacking immunity, up to 90% of indigenous populations died from disease before direct contact. Without millions of human gardeners actively managing the land with fire and agriculture, the ecosystem descended into chaos. The continent underwent a massive, rapid deforestation. This sudden absence of human predation also triggered an unnatural ecological chain reaction. Wildlife populations, like bison and passenger pigeons, experienced explosive, unchecked growth. When white colonizers finally pushed westward, they completely misread the landscape. They believed they were discovering pure nature, but were actually wandering through an overgrown post-apocalyptic ruin. The United States government exploited this demographic collapse, aggressively pushing its borders west to claim this supposedly empty land. Policies like the Homestead Act of 1862 accelerated the physical alteration of the environment. For a $10 fee, settlers were granted 160 acres of land, violently displacing native survivors and carving ancient hunting grounds into European-style agricultural grids. To speed up the displacement, colonizers engaged in ecological warfare. They deliberately slaughtered millions of bison, actively attempting to starve the Plains Indians by cutting off their primary food source. When ecological destruction wasn't enough, the U.S. military was deployed to violently clear out remaining resistance, shattering ancient tribal structures in events like the 1890 Wounded Knee Massacre. The settling of the American West was an organized campaign to overwrite a pre-existing civilization and replace it with an industrial agricultural machine. This chart shows the demographic freefall of the indigenous population in North America. From an estimated 5 million people before contact, the population plummeted to just 237,000 by the year 1900. This physical removal was immediately followed by deliberate cultural erasure. The U.S. government instituted the Dawes Act and a vast network of mandatory boarding schools designed to force assimilation. Indigenous children were kidnapped, taken to these schools, and stripped of their traditional clothes, languages, and identities. The stated goal of the program was explicitly to kill the Indian and save the man. The survivors of this multi-generational campaign were pushed completely off their ancestral lands. A population that once managed a lush, continent-wide garden was corralled into the most barren, inhospitable edges of the country. The government then took these remote, marginalized reservation lands and used them as dumping grounds. Starting in the 1970s, hundreds of nuclear tests were conducted near these areas, leaving behind millions of tons of radioactive waste. Today, native communities living on these toxic lands suffer from severe health crises, including massive spikes in cancer rates from ongoing uranium exposure. The American landscape was never truly discovered. Through biological devastation, ethnic cleansing, and systematic ecological exploitation, it was violently terraformed, a modern empire built directly on top of a forgotten garden.